the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Setting out from his house in order to offer sacrifices at the temple, the elder Joachim arrived, heavy laden with gifts and offerings and animals to offer to God, to sacrifice, and to show his great piety. And when he got to the temple, the priest, before allowing him any closer, stopped him at the gate and said, You, Joachim, you alone of the house of Israel, have not produced a child. You shall not be allowed to enter, for clearly you are a wicked man. And so Joachim was turned away, and he went home and found his wife, also elderly, waiting for him to bring in the sacrifice goods so that they may eat the Passover together and rejoice in the deliverance of the Israelites from Egypt. And instead of sharing this triumphant meal of their freedom and delivery from oppression, they shared an embrace of tears because they had not received a child. So these two people, each in their own way, went about harnessing this pain and anguish into unceasing prayer. Joachim went off into the mountains for 40 days of prayer and fasting, and his wife Anna went into a garden where she sat beneath a tree and also prayed. After this 40 days, they came together and embraced and conceived, and she bore a female child. We know her today as the Theotokos, the All-Holy, the Mother of God. The name they gave her was Mary, at least as we hear it most often, as we hear it from the Greek sources of the Gospels. But in that time, her kin, speaking Aramaic or Hebrew, would have referred to her as Miriam. And so Joachim and Anna give their holy, blessed gift from God child the name of a great prophetess from the Old Testament, the name of Moses' sister, the female leader of the people who left the slavery and death in Egypt and were delivered into the land of freedom and life that God had promised to the Israelite people. She was named after this great prophetess, and she is just like her, but more perfect. As Miriam walked with the Hebrews, at first being herself under slavery, not free, most likely to die in a foreign land without being able to worship her God, Miriam walked with the Hebrews in their midst across to the promised land and received her own freedom and life. Likewise, the Virgin Mary with us was in need of the salvation that came from her Son. And as she died, he assumed her into his heavenly paradise. Miriam, the prophetess, she crossed through the Red Sea and was sanctified along with all the other Israelites. And the Virgin Mary was anointed with the Holy Spirit when she heard the very first words of the Annunciation. She was drawing water from a well. Miriam followed behind a pillar of light as she walked towards freedom. The Virgin Mary walked with the one who is light from light and true God from true God, her own Son, the light of the world, who shines in the darkness and is not overtaken by it. Miriam stood in the midst of the Hebrew people and watched as her brother Moses put a bronze serpent on a pole and held it up in the middle of the community in order to save them from the attacks of snakes. The Virgin Mary stood in the midst of the Hebrew people and watched as they took her son and put him on a cross and lifted him up in the air so that we could all be saved. The the Hebrew people, when they wandered through the desert and were trying to find salvation that they knew was promised to them from God, when they had begun this journey and yet were still finding hardship, they turned to Miriam and asked Miriam to bring their complaints, their struggles, their hardships, and their questions to Moses and to God. We, as we have begun the path of salvation and yet still struggle and face temptation and sin, go to the Virgin Mary and ask her to bring our prayers, our concerns, and her own intercessions to her Son. So just as Miriam helped deliver the people of Israel, so Mary helps deliver her parents from the shame of childlessness. Just as Miriam witnessed the salvation of the Israelites, so Mary witnesses our own. Just as Miriam interceded on behalf of the people, so too the Virgin Mary intercedes on our behalf to her Son and our God, to whom is due glory, honor, and worship. Amen.